This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast with thought leader and transformative psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. This show focuses on the betterment of humanity on a global scale. Each episode will leave you enlightened, inspired, and ready to make an impact in your world. Welcome to the show. Welcome to your life. Welcome to humanity. Here's Dr. Fred.
Today, it is my honor and pleasure to have my guest, Bo Bennett, joining us. And one thing that Bo might not know or might not have recalled is that Bo and I have now been friends for right near 14 years. Bo and I met in 2006 during a time when I was going through a massive transition in the way I was looking at mental health, mental illness, and ways we might be able to affect a massive change in the world. And Bo was so instrumental in our connection back then. And since then, we've had several encounters, and I've kind of been watching Bo from the outside and the periphery, and we've even come together on a few occasions for business. And we've just been crossing paths in two ships in a night at times, and other times just really working together to make a difference in the world. So pleasure to introduce Bo Bennett to my listeners. So Bo is an entrepreneur, a programmer, a web developer, and a social psychologist. And he's also the author of over a dozen books, most of which are related to critical thinking and reason. He's an adjunct professor and teaches many online courses as well. And you can find out more about Bo, and he'll give you more information at the end of our talk today. Before we dive into today's conversation with Bo Bennett, I want to take just a minute to let you know that I just finished putting together the audiobook version of my soon-to-be-released book called The Creative 8. The book teaches a very simple method of healing that utilizes creativity and self-expression primarily. As a listener to the Welcome to Humanity podcast, I want to give you a completely free copy of this audiobook as a deep thank you for listening to the show. Go to welcometohumanity.net/creative. I've used the Creative Aid methodology for both my psychiatric patients and my coaching clients, and for several years, I've been getting just fantastic results. Guess what? The method takes less than 5 minutes a day to implement. I know you're going to love it. So download your free copy of the Creative Aid audiobook today at welcometohumanity.net/creative. Now, let's get back to our conversation with Bo Bennett. Bo, it's just an honor and pleasure. Thank you for joining me this morning.
You bet. It's great to be here, Dr. Fred. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's really, really great. It's so much fun to be able to use this technology. And, I recall a time, 2010 or 2009, or maybe it was even back in 2006, where my first podcast as a guest, I didn't even know what a podcast was, never had heard about it. You interviewed me with Ryan over your shoulder as a podcast guest. And I was like, oh, what? Whatever you want here, I'm in. And now it's become like an epidemic all over the world to do these podcasts. So that's what I recall. Do you remember that?
Oh, of course. I remember it. It was a lot of fun.
Exactly. And, Bo, when I think about you, I think that that's really the front edge that you find yourself most comfortable. Being on the front edge of a frontier of some sort of industry or ideas that no one has even thought about yet that you're actually dancing in. And is that consistent with how you see yourself? Because I really see you as that level of visionary, a person who not only takes his vision, but actually jumps into it and then creates from the unknown something that's going to catch on in the world a few years later anyways. Is that how you see yourself?
Sometimes, and I appreciate that. But at times as well, I feel like I'm behind the times. But I think we all do that as well. In some areas, I definitely feel like, okay, I'm ahead of the curve. I'm ahead of the trends that are actually there. And it may be too soon. Where other things, I'm like, darn it, only if I did this a couple years ago. So there's always, it depends on what we're talking about. But for the most part, I like to think that I am a step ahead.
Awesome. So we're with my good friend and honorable guest today, Bo Bennett, talking about really a lot of different things. But Bo is an expert in critical thinking and reason. He's going to tell us a little bit now about some of the things that he's been up to recently and maybe some things that he's working on into the future. Bo, what are you up to? What's going on with you? And where are you active and where are you committed? Where is your energy being focused on these days?
Well, generally, since the beginning of the year, my priorities have been to take my entire web empire that I've built over the last 10, 15 years and just really clean it up. That has a lot to do with business. It has a lot to do with some of the extracurricular activities as well, including all of the teaching and the critical thinking and the reasoning. But together, I had before, like in December, let's say, over 50 different websites, all devoted trying to start something new. And of course, not everything always catches on. But if you have so many different things out there, some of them do work and some of them do work extremely well. So what I wanted to do this year, I wanted to do in 2020 was to take everything that I've built and just really clean it up. Get rid of the crap that I'm not using, get rid of the stuff that people aren't really visiting and appreciating, and put all my energy and focus in those areas that I do feel are either profitable for business reasons or that have some really good benefit, public benefit in terms of like a lot of the writing I do and a lot of the free websites that I offer on critical thinking. So that's really what I've been focused on doing these last couple months. And I still probably have like another couple months to go before everything is actually in order the way I would like it to be.
Well, that sounds really exciting. It sounds like a super grand plan to kind of go through everything that has mattered to you for 10 or 15 years and everything that you've actually designed or created, and then actually determine which one of those are being utilized or which one of those might be effective or which one of those might be a massive contribution worth keeping, and then congealing these and making it, I suspect, giving it a capacity to be embraced as one or to be at least utilized in a way that's functional, like cleaning up a warehouse or cleaning up your virtual garage or something of just an extraordinary amount of tools that you have laid out in front of you.
Right. And it's all about getting rid of the stuff, the wasted energy, and just putting all the focus and energy into the things that actually work. So not only is all the waste going to go away, but everything that is still there, I'm going to focus on and put more energy and more resources into so they could become even more successful than they already are.
So I know I'm speaking for my listeners. Are you coming up with any kind of trends, any things that you're noticing that either are surprising or, you're noticing the ones that are worth keeping have certain characteristics that are like each other? Or are there different, a couple, 3 different groups? Or what's making the cut is one way to understand it. What are the things that you're finding yourself choosing to keep as we move forward?
Well, once again, there are 2 general categories of what I do and the different websites that I have. One is business related, and the other category would be some kind of social benefit in dealing with critical thinking, reasoning, psychology. So in terms of business, it really is the practical services that people could actually use. And that makes sense if you think about it. There's so much crap out there, so much junk, and people don't have that much time. Everybody is competing for their time, whether it's television, whether it's YouTube videos, whether it's free courses. There's tons and tons of content out there. And that's what you're essentially doing. You're competing for people's time. So it's ultra competitive, and you have to have an incredibly good product, something that offers a lot of value. So actually, you could take that whole concept and just put it towards what I do for businesses and what I do with the psychology and the reasoning as well. You just need to make sure that people are getting a heck of a lot out of it and they really appreciate it.
So thank you for that. That's really beautiful. What are you using for your measurement tools or your parameters that have something be seen as valuable enough to perpetuate?
In the business end, it's all about profit. It's all about not only how much money it's bringing in, but how much effort and time and how much expense it costs. You have to factor all of that in to realize what is actually worth it. And also, does something have some growth potential? I have a lot of little sites that are doing okay in terms of bringing in a little bit of revenue, but they're just a pain in the neck to maintain. So I had to make the difficult decision to get rid of some of the revenue and get rid of those sites because I knew there wasn't a lot of growth potential. In terms of the other sites, the sites that don't make money, of course, there's a different metric, but because we're not bringing in money. And I guess it's a little bit harder to measure when we're talking about that metric because it's really about feedback and it's about use, like how many people actually use the site, how many people post on the site, what kind of benefit they get from it. I always get feedback all the time from by email or different posts and so forth. So I take that in consideration too. So altogether, I just kind of make the judgment whether people enjoy the site or not based on how much it's being used and how much they actually like the site.
One thing as you speak, I have a question about the second form here, the social contribution and the metric being used for that. And, really determining whether people are liking what you're laying down in that area. And then there's a third thing that I really wonder about for someone like you, which is the stuff that's out there that people don't yet know they're going to be interested in, that you have developed as a visionary, that's out there because you already see it coming clear. And even though people don't know that it's worthwhile or that they like it, they will soon. And it's worth keeping because you know that to be true. Is that a category worth paying attention to as we discuss this?
I would say yes, but with a caveat. I don't know anything. And although I like to pretend I'm that confident, over the years, I've learned a little humility in that the things I think that I know, it turns out that they really were just bad ideas that I never. So I approach that idea with a little bit of humility, and I say, you know what? I'm confident that something like this will take off. It just doesn't have the right marketing yet. It doesn't have the right exposure. Maybe the environment isn't ready for it. The culture isn't ready for it quite yet. But so I'll keep it out there. I'll put a little extra resource into it. I know it's kind of eating up some of my resources, but I'm confident enough that it soon one day will catch on. So yes, there certainly is a category there. But like I said, with a caveat that I'm not as confident as you might have made me sound.
No, I really, that's one thing I love about you, Bo Bennett, is that there is a humility behind your brilliance. And when I met you back in 2006, that's, believe it or not, the one thing I was most impressed with was your overwhelming brilliance. And I don't mean that not so much to just butter you up, because it's just simply a true factor of what it is to be Bo Bennett, is that your intelligence and your capacity to see what's important for humans inside of, some of your writings and how you speak and what you create and what your commitments are, like who you are for the world around you, and even the businesses that you develop and the purpose for developing them, all takes advantage of just what it means to be Bo Bennett and living in Bo Bennett's shoes inside of the visionary characteristic, as well as your intelligence and your willingness and eagerness to make a contribution to humanity. How about that? Anything to say about any of that?
Well, I definitely appreciate that. Thank you. And anytime you want to butter me up, that's just fine. I'm always happy to listen to it.
Okay, awesome. That's great. I'll probably choose to go there one or two more times before the end of this call, and maybe after the call as well.
Awesome.
Depending on how you do on the call. So far, you're doing good enough, but we're really keeping track about how things are going on the call, about whether or not I'll be buttering you up ever again after the call. We'll see how things go.
Fair enough.
Okay, cool. So when I talk about like what it is that you do, and one of the things we talked about in your bio is that you're a social psychologist, and I know that you're really proud of that degree. I know that it's something that you cherish, and it's something you often even lead with when describing what you're up to. And so, Bo, can you tell us some of the things that matter to you in the world of what it means to be a human these days? Or what is social psychology for Bo Bennett? What is that envelope?
Right. Well, social psychology is basically about human relations and how our lives are shaped by the lives of other people around us. And I feel like there's this overall idea that we are alone in some sense, that each one of us is in complete control of our own destinies, if you want to call it that. And we could do anything, and it's not shaped by other people. But that's not the case. And social psychology tells us that. It tells us how important other people are to us. And I know there are two sides to this coin, and I always struggled this as well. I used to be, Dr. Fred, as you know, a motivational speaker. I used to get paid professionally to go into different companies and businesses and start talking about, give them the rah-rah stuff and how great life is and how they could do anything they want to do. So I was conflicted by this because in a sense, I really am still that type of guy that, you could do anything you want. You really got to put your mind to it. But in another sense, especially since my education and pursuit down that path, I really began to realize, like asking the questions, how come? I see a lot of very motivated people. I see a lot of people that seem to have that drive, but they just don't quite make it, or they're not happy, or they're just not happy with life. So what's going on? And that really did introduce me and start pushing me towards looking at the forces around us that shape our lives And those forces are other people. And the reason why this is so important, Dr. Fred, is because by knowing this, we are the change in other people's lives. So when you have an individual who you see struggling, or somebody who's depressed or not happy, clinically depressed, but, just not really embracing life, not getting where they want to be, it's not as easy as just telling them, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get out there and go make your mark in the world. It doesn't work that way. Sometimes people need support. Sometimes people need help. They need friends. They need somebody to be a motivating factor in their lives. And it's these social influences that shape the ideas, the ideology, the drives of other people. And once you realize that you could have such a great influence on other people, then it makes you even more empowered. Not the kind of empowered that you had before, maybe that you didn't realize this when you thought you could do everything yourself. But now it's just not about helping you. It's about you helping everybody else. And if everybody had even just a sense of this idea that they are such a major influence in other people's lives, and doing the tiniest thing could set somebody on a different course, it's just a very empowering idea. And I think it's very important that people understand this as well. And that's what social psychology is about, basically.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. I am hearing something here as well, which is that by no means are you speaking simply to professionals, to people who have committed their lives to helping others. Everyone from social workers to counselors to therapists to psychologists, psychiatrists, etc. People who have all even made it their life's profession to help people. Although this would be useful for them, I hear you speaking to every single human being.
That's it. Yeah, it's everybody. It's not just those people. And you don't realize how much you could change somebody's life by just saying something nice to them. When they're in a bad position, a bad shape, whatever, just giving them a nice comment, being kind, just doing an act of kindness, whatever. Something small like that could really change the trajectory of somebody's life. And it could motivate them to help other people as well and to do kind things for other people.
Yeah, that's just so the fact that we're social beings and we live in this lattice of, 7.8 billion people that are really in some ways one unit, and thereby each and every one of us affecting each and every other one of us. It's like an overwhelming thought. But the truth is, when we do make impacts by saying something kind or random acts of kindness, or maybe just listening to another person authentically or radically hearing what it is that is going on with someone, whether they're either troubled or even when they're doing well, the impact of this is so extraordinary that it really alters the framework of what we might think as our own personal insignificance.
Yeah. Yeah, well put.
It's really, really beautiful stuff. I'm so glad that you're doing that. But when you became a social psychologist a little later in your life, what is that right?
Yes.
When did you get your degree?
I got my degree, and maybe I got my doctorate 4 years ago, maybe. Yeah, 4 years. Well, actually,
Okay.
I was teaching for 3 years, so like 5 years ago, maybe. Let's just say call it 5 years ago.
Okay. So you got your doctorate 5 years ago, and in the process of learning, of training, of reading, of, being out in the field and becoming a true blue social psychologist, what kind of things outside of your websites, maybe outside of your profound impact in the world of virtual communication, where have you noticed yourself being most effective in the community?
Outside of the websites.
Maybe not outside. I don't want to pigeonhole you to outside of the website, because I think so much of our work these days is done on the
Right.
web. So it's like maybe the question is more, what kind of global impact are you noticing with your shifting view of what it means to be a human with other humans?
Right. Well, I would say there are two aspects to that. One is the websites, and that's kind of a given with all the people that I come in contact with. The websites obviously are global. I work with people all over the world. It's really an interesting, I guess, endeavor working with these people and understanding their cultures, their beliefs, how they were brought up, how they see the world given their current culture. And, you name it, people from all different countries all over the world. It's great when we kind of all get together surrounding the same thing, what we all have in common, no matter if we have different religions, no religion, different political beliefs. We all share the idea of truth, of reason, of critical thinking. it's this common denominator that we can all share no matter where we all come from it. And I think that's been a wonderful thing to explore that. And that definitely helped me. Like I've been running the site for the site called Logically Fallacious, where I answer about 100 different questions every month and when work with people, constantly chatting with people and evaluating arguments and so forth. And that's been going on for years, so almost a decade. It's been a great way to increase my mental database, if you want to call it that. On the other end of things, outside of the web, I work with students. I was an adjunct professor at LaSalle University for over 3 years. And working with the students, it's not global in the sense that it's in one town in Massachusetts, but it is global in the sense that the effect that I have on them will ultimately spread to the effect they have on other people and so forth to get to the point where it is actually global.
Right. So like the ripple effect you're speaking towards, that if you affect one person who then goes global, you most definitely had an impact on the global directly.
Yes.
Okay. Well, you speak towards sort of the common denominator, or that it all in some ways dissolves down to each and every individual or so-called individual, this lattice of 7.8 billion that we call individual.
Right.
It's like the truth. You mentioned truth, reason, and critical thinking as being something that we all share in how we move forward in the world. Can you tell us a little bit more about, this is an area of life that matters a lot to you. I know that. And so can you give us a little bit about what you're noticing when you see that, even if they're from different cultures, different religions, different, economic situations or anything like that, what we as humans share certain characteristics. And it sounds like you boiled it down, at least in no small part, to truth, reason, and critical thinking.
Right. And I should clarify that. I should say it's the desire for truth. It's the desire to be reasonable. It's I guess, the understanding that the closest we can get to something called truth, we need to approach it in a similar way. And that way we call the reasoning process. And that is something that we all share. I mean, we can agree on like the basic rules of logic, the basic rules of reason. And we all understand that A equals A is true. And, you can't have A and not A at the same time. So like the basic laws, it's like these foundational understandings help us to act as a starting point where we can just take like basically any issue that you wanted to take and really look into that and come to the best solution, the best conclusion using this kind of methodology, if you want to call it that. And that's kind of what critical thinking is about. And it's about exposing the fact that we are flawed beings in the sense that our brains were not evolved for reason. We evolved with the idea or the goals of living and reproducing. And that's it. In terms of nature, that's what nature cares about. It wants us to reproduce, and it wants us to continue living, or at least continue living long enough until we reproduce and pass our genes on. That's what it's about. And that's how like our brains have developed and evolved in such a way to facilitate those goals specifically. So there's a lot of what's called cognitive biases that we have, ways of seeing the world and understanding things that once we understand what a cognitive bias is, we say, oh yeah, of course that happens to me. It happens all the time, but we don't realize it because we don't really think about it well enough. They're basically, cognitive biases are like optical illusions for the brain. Everybody knows what an optical illusion is, and we see something like, oh, it's completely different than what we thought it was. And that's what a cognitive bias is. Like the confirmation bias is a common one. Confirmation bias can be defined in many different ways, but one of the most prevalent aspects of the confirmation bias is our desire to, at least in today's society, our desire to look up information that already agrees with our belief system.
Exactly.
So and we see this all the time with people on the right, they're like Fox News and that's it. I don't want to hear from any of those other networks. And people on the left say, oh, geez, I don't even want to hear from Fox News. Give me CNN or PBS and whatever. And that's a perfect example of that, because we just want the information that makes us feel good. We don't like what's called cognitive dissonance. We don't like the idea when we have two conflicting conflicting ideas like, oh, geez, wait, if this is true, then my long-held belief can't also be true. And now that makes us cognitively uncomfortable, and it causes dis-ease in us. Not disease, but dis-ease.
Dis-ease.
Right.
Yeah.
So in order to avoid that, we tend to take these mental shortcuts and just keep thinking in such a way that just keeps us comfortable. And that's a big problem. But if you understand critical thinking, if you understand the foundation of cognitive biases, of logical fallacies, you can not only use that information to look at any argument, and not just, and when I say argument, I don't mean a formal argument where you have to have premises, conclusion, but basically any claim that anybody makes. Anything you hear on the news, anything you read on the web, and you could take that information and you could apply it, and you could determine, okay, well, I see now how badly this is flawed and how wrong this is. And basically what you're doing is you're becoming smarter by applying these rules, and you're getting better information. You are learning more of what is true, and you're starting to unlearn and not be attached to or not believe the things that you once believed that are false. So it's a process, and it's not an overnight process. It's a lifetime process. But I strongly believe it's the best process that one could take. And one of the reasons I like this so much is because I thought before there was a time when I was all about, well, maybe I should focus on religion and I should focus on that, and kind of going through all the arguments with religion and trying to convince people of whatever. And then I said, well, how about politics? Politics is more important, so maybe we should be doing that. Or how about some social issues? But what it turns out, the common denominator on all of this, again, is critical thinking. It's reasoning process. If you know how to think critically, if you know how to reason well, if you know some basic laws of logic, and if you use that as a starting point, everything else falls into line. And you're not going to come up with everything right all of the time. There's no way that that's going to happen, but you are going to be in a much better position to get to the right answer more often than not.
Thank you so much. That's just beautiful and brilliant in its notion. I just have some, as you speak, I still get something, and I'm sure you can speak to this. This idea of starting somewhere is so critical when we're thinking or trying to put together some sort of sense out of what our human experience is about. And what I hear you positing is in the world of really just getting a basic laws of logic, like A equals A, or, A and not A can't be in the same place at the same time, or those kinds of things. Like basic reasoning and basic critical thinking is a place to start from, and to expand when evaluating all claims and arguments that anyone makes about anything that has the possibility of upending previously conceived or previously thought of notions being up for grabs and all the time, like being transformable all the time. Things that I might have thought to be so up until today are better. I should hold them out there to at least be available to the possibility that it isn't what I thought it was. Is that fair?
Yeah. I think that's great. And you touched on one other thing that's very important, and that's confidence level too. Once you really study, I don't even want to say like you have to professionally study or academically study cognitive psychology, but if you even understand the basics of cognitive psychology and understand the biases, for all of your listeners, go to Wikipedia, type in cognitive biases list, or just go to the Google, and the first thing that'll come up will be the Wikipedia page with about 200 to 300 different cognitive biases.
Wow.
Just go through that, spend 10 minutes and start reading those and say, holy crap, I cannot believe on how much we are deceived, how much our brain deceives us on these basic things. And you could say, oh yeah, okay, I could do that. You start reading these and you say, this happens to me all the time. And once you understand that, like humility is completely redefined, because you understand that that when you think you're right, the chances are you're probably not, or there's something wrong, and your confidence level for things definitely gets to be more realistic. You don't speak anymore in absolutes, and you don't say, I'm right and you're wrong and this is the way it is, but you approach your reasoning and your argumentation and your discussions, everything, with a lot more humility, where you understand how flawed our brain is and the reasoning process and how easily you could be wrong. Maybe this is off a different subject, but one of the things that I'm impressed most about when I hear politicians talk, when they say, yeah, I was wrong. And they correct themselves. They say, yes, I was wrong when I said that because I got new information and I didn't have that information at the time. But now I do. And based on this new information, well, of course, it makes sense to change my mind. If everybody said that, if every politician said that, wow, that one little thing, having that understanding, it's not only humility too. I'm sure there's something in politics where if you change your mind, you're seen as a flip-flopper. And the general public doesn't understand. And there's some truth to that, because if you really have no I guess politics in a sense where you're just kind of going with what everybody else says and you're jumping from one thing to another. Well, yeah, that's kind of like flip-flopping. But really, if you didn't know something before and you know something now, if you have new information and you continue not to change your mind and stick with that old information, well, you're doing yourself, and if you're a public servant, everybody else, a great disservice.
A great disservice indeed. And I find that same phenomena inside my work as an expert witness, where I'm given some degree of finite information, sometimes, excessive finite information with the assignment to take apart a case and learn what happened or what didn't happen, who's liable and who's not liable, what was the cause versus what were some correlations versus, those kinds of things. And then new information might come in after my deposition, between deposition and trial, that really actually fundamentally alters that which I said was so with the amount of information I had prior. And I'm left really holding the bag like, okay, what am I supposed to do now with new information that has me actually alter my own truth as I approach trial and having to raise my right hand and speak the truth and nothing but the truth? Like, what am I supposed to do with that? And I think what you're saying is that's just a phenomena that happens to each and every one of us every single day when we get new information. And if we were honest with ourselves, we could alter what we knew was so to a new level of knowing, given new information that has entered the scene. Yeah.
Yes, but the one caveat there again is if you do have these cognitive biases, the confirmation bias, then you don't allow yourself to get that new information, or you dismiss the new information. I mean, you hear it, you read it.
Right. Like faulty source or something. Call it a faulty source.
But yeah, exactly. Fake news, whatever. Like you don't even consider it because you understand that if that were true,
then everything I thought before would be challenged or false, or I'd have to.
Right. And sometimes it would have to radically change your worldview, radically change how you live, how you understand yourself and your position and your place in this world. And it's just too much for many people to handle.
Oh my goodness.
That it's just, you forget about it. It's not worth it.
I got it. Well, in my world as a psychiatrist, and now backing off to the world of, non-diagnosing or pre-diagnosing psychiatrists, I run across that particular phenomena. It appears, other people have it. I don't have it. I just want to make that clear. I'm devoid of what it is that you're talking about. Most of what I think is actually so. And I think it's been proven over and over again by my experience that most of what I think is actually so. Can we just accept that?
There you go. You're learning well, Dr. Fred.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. And so, the next thing I really want to get is, now we're on with Bo Bennett. Bo Bennett is an extraordinary social psychologist who I met about 14 years ago and has agreed to come on. Really, it's my honor to have Bo coming on for our podcast today on February 28th, 2020. And we're talking about a lot of different things, but we're really also talking primarily about Bo's interest and his commitment in the world of reason and critical thinking. And we've been exploring a lot of different ideas in our first 35 minutes together. So let's take on a few more. Is that okay, Bo? We'll take on a few more.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right, cool. The next thing I want to ask you, I think on the tail of what you just said, these paradigm shifting things that happen over time that, there's some classic ones, of course, with Copernicus or with Magellan or with Einstein, the people who prior to their existence, we thought something. And then after they did their work, we thought something completely different and now know that to be true. And we live with that as if that is true. So that the Earth revolves around the sun, or that it's actually a round and not flat Earth, or that, whatever the theory of relativity might have contributed to how we think things are going, how we think things go now, has fundamentally altered the way we look at the world as humans. And by doing so, really has altered many other things that seemingly are unrelated to whether or not the world is round, et cetera.
Right.
Did you notice any time in your last 5 years? And now I want to make it very clear to my listeners that I did not prime you about this question. So there's not like, we don't have a set answer for this question. We'll see how Bo handles that. But basically, did you notice anything that you really absolutely knew positively to be true up until, let's say, 2015 when you were, getting your degree, or up in maybe the last decade, that through your work inside of critical thinking and becoming a social psychologist whose specialty is this area of critical thinking and reason, can you bring up something to us that you actually knew to be true that you now either know isn't true or know that the opposite is true and not what you thought? Is there anything that happened to you personally?
With that level of confidence, no. I think I've always been on the spectrum of confidence as opposed to 100% knowing versus not knowing. So I see everything as being on that scale. Like, how confident are you? And in philosophy, they talk about the difference between knowing something and believing something. And it's not very clear. And depending on which philosopher you read and who you ask, you're going to get a different reason. But the overall consensus, if there is one, an understanding of the difference between knowledge and belief is that belief is, there's less confidence in the belief, and there's nothing that could back it up demonstrably. There may be some like evidence, but there's not something, it's like unfalsifiable. Whereas in terms of knowing something, when you say I know something, you're very high up on that confidence level. Some people say like 100%, they're 100% confident. I would never, ever say that about anything. And I don't think I ever did. I always had some.
Are you 100% sure that you never did?
No, absolutely not. Right.
Okay.
Right. There's always this level of probability that comes with everything that I think I know. So to answer your basic question, there was nothing that I was that confident that I would say I'm 100% positive or I know for sure. In terms of different ideas that have changed, on the spot, I can't think of anything in particular that was that drastic, but I know there were a lot of little things that I began to understand more. And I think the biggest thing, like I said before, was the fact that my level of confidence in everything has went down to what I believe is a much more reasonable degree, just based on understanding the human psyche and how things are processed.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Beautiful. So, Bo, one of the questions we like to ask our guests is that you've already danced around it pretty significantly, but we'll see if we can milk this for even a more precise answer. Is that, like, what's going on in the world that really bothers you? Like, what's going on in the world right now that, you're moved to make a difference in, that you live, that for you wish that you could fix it or resolve it or change it, alter it, transform it. Is there any specific thing that you would list as your number one area that's really, or right up there on the top of the list of things that are just bugging you about the way things are going?
Yeah, it would be lack of critical thinking and poor critical thinking. I mean, that is what I definitely feel is the source of a lot of these problems that we have today. And without getting political, I would say that there's this guy that's on TV a lot and on Twitter a lot. And
yeah, I think I know somebody.
And says a lot of things that are like blatantly not true.
Yeah.
And if you even use like the tiniest bit of reason and critical thinking and fact checking, people would know. And what bothers me so much is not that people don't know what he's saying is untrue, because I really do believe that a lot of people say, yeah, but he's a politician and all politicians say things like that. Justification, rationalization. I mean, these are all, again, cognitive processes.
Yeah, don't let the facts get in your way. Yeah.
And what bothers me most is the lack of caring. It's this, I guess it's this allegiance to ideology as opposed to an allegiance to truth and facts.
Isn't that great? Oh,
And this is what drives me nuts. And just not caring anymore about
mhm,
truth, about things that are true.
mhm,
And it's that indifference and I
mhm,
guess the cult-like behavior that really drives me nuts.
mm,
The scientific
mhm,
illiteracy and distrust that people have in the process, the inability to distinguish fact from fiction, and also the whole idea of the
mhm,
ease of being manipulated. If
mhm,
you understand psychology and even if you read through that list of cognitive biases, you don't have to have a PhD in psychology to know this. You could easily see the techniques and once again also read different logical fallacies, and in addition to cognitive biases, you could see the techniques that people use to manipulate other people, that people use for
mhm.
persuasion techniques. Persuasion versus manipulation, what's the difference? Well, it depends on your perspective, right? It depends on
Mhm.
some people could
Right.
say that well, manipulation is for nefarious purposes or something, but according to whom? Maybe manipulation according to a certain person is for good reason. So I don't like to really draw a
Mhm.
distinction between those two. The important thing is people can really get you to believe and think and act pretty much I won't say any way that they want you to, but they could
Yeah.
influence your
Yeah.
beliefs and your behavior a heck of a lot just simply by knowing some basics of psychology. And if people knew this, it's kind of like opening up the secret door, pulling up the curtain and seeing the wizard pulling the strings. And if people just knew these basic things, they would be able to detect when people are manipulating them. My friend Ryan, which and we did this
Mhm.
podcast a while back
Mhm.
called Real Marketing Bull, and that was a lot of fun. This was like one of my first forays into critical thinking. What we did, it was about probably like 10 years ago, we did this podcast. We were just so sick of all the marketing bull crap that was going around, the techniques that they used. So what we really did is we dove
Mhm.
into it and we would expose these different ideas and we would just do it in a fun manner. And it was a really interesting, and I think for anybody who was listening, it was interesting way to see how businesses manipulate us in order to buying their products, buying more of their stuff. But it doesn't end there. It's everywhere in politics, in religion, in the world around us. It's everywhere. And if you know the techniques, you could spot it and say, okay, I know what's going on here. And then you become a little bit better at skepticism. And then you can just make better decisions overall. So I think if that's kind of the big problem that bothers me today, and I really hope that people will take the initiative to start learning more about this and just say, I don't want to be manipulated. I understand that this is happening. I understand that people are doing this to me and I don't want to be. I want to be free of this manipulation and to see things a little bit more clearly. And I hope that people wake up and start to feel that and believe that.
Mhm. That's fabulous. I am very moved by what you're saying. And given the earlier part of our conversation, I think there's a general focus in who you are, of really paying attention to the impact that people
Mm.
have on other people. And that can be impact in multiple different directions. But given the first half of our conversation, when we were speaking to, that we are not individuals, that we are actually individuals completely adjustable or completely dependent or interdependent on each other. And even small responses to our pain can alter the trajectory of our life on a fundamental scale. We also get in this way that as individuals affected by those around us, we have to be a little bit diligent or even vigilant or even careful, even cautious, at least be able to assess at some level using critical thinking and reasoning what it is we're hearing from others so that we can make proper decisions, at least decisions that pay attention to the things that matter to us. In this case, maybe truth should be one of those, or maybe, sometimes I've heard it split up into truth and beauty and goodness, but the eternity, like really making a difference in another person's life, is both a miraculous phenomena and a phenomena worth paying attention to with respect to the possible danger.
Right. Right. Well said.
Mhm. Awesome. Well, that's really, really cool. So what can we do? I mean, Bo, look, let's say you had your finger on the joystick of this whole game called life. And I've never used that phrase before, but I kind of like it. And what if, let's say that was the way it was going? What would you instruct us to be able to do, either as a functional group of intellectual academics or really taking it down to just general public? What can people do so that we can, find ourselves digging into more about how to determine what matters to us, what's truthful about what matters to us, and how we can help the people around us or ourselves live a more useful life, a life that matters more.
Right. Well, in general, I think it boils down to teaching people how to think as opposed to teaching them what to think. And this could play out in academia as well as in personal lives and parenting. In academia, there's a lot of content-based instruction. And I know this is necessary for a lot of different subjects, but not for every subject. And I think that academia needs to be changed. And I'm not just talking about college level, but K through 12 and all the way up. We need a different process. We need to really incorporate a lot more critical thinking. We need to encourage questions. We need to encourage challenging of different ideas, challenging of professors and teachers. And, why is it this way?
A little radical.
It is.
I think I'm trying to stay within the realm of possible reality, but I mean, challenging.
I feel my Bernie Sanders coming out with my radical ideas.
That's pushing it. Yeah, pushing it. So.
But even like in parenting, and that's the way we tried to raise our kids too. We didn't want to. We tell them kind of like what we believe, and then we challenge them. Say, well, what do you think this is right? Why? Why not? And here is what other people believe. Educating them into the world of different ideas and beliefs out there, and different religious and political beliefs. The last thing we want to do is we don't want kids just parroting what we believe, because we could be wrong. It's not. It's always about like the process of how they come to the answer, how they come to believe what they believe. It's that process that's so important. And if you rob people of that process by just telling them what to believe, of what to think, then that's what you're doing. You're robbing them of the process, and you're robbing them of the critical thinking skills that they need to build in order to come to those conclusions themselves. So we can encourage more of that type of thinking, teaching people how to think as opposed to what to think.
Beautiful. So, Bo, I have a question about this. Are we really actually getting, if we were to utilize this methodology on a more pervasive scale, if more of us were using, do you feel like we would get closer to an actual truth? Or do you actually feel what we would get closer to is realizing that we have no chance to get close to a truth?
Well, it depends what you mean by truth. Again, if we're looking at like philosophical truth, like what's the meaning of life, the purpose of the universe, like these kind of truths, they're very interesting in religious or philosophical debate. But in terms of living life, in terms of running a country, and in terms of doing well, being happy, increasing your own well-being, doing well in business, these things really don't matter too much. But the kind of truths are the kind of truths that I might be referring to here is more the demonstrable kind of truths. Like, is this a fact or is it not a fact? Is this something that can be demonstrated? Is this something that can be proven? When you have 97% of the scientists in the world who has spent the last 30 years of their lives studying one particular thing, and they all tell you the same thing, and you say, that's a bunch of crap. I don't believe that. Well, what do you believe and why? Well, because this politician told me something different. Okay. Yeah. Think about your methodology there. It's like, okay, so when do we ignore 97% of the scientists? These kind of truths are not truths with a capital T. They're not the kind of unquestionable, unshakable truths that somebody may hold to in a religious belief or a philosophical belief even. It's the kind of truth that we could demonstrate through the reasoning process, through the critical thinking process. And we could definitely get to it. And we could say with an incredible amount of confidence that this is true. And if you don't believe it, well, you're wrong. Everything is not subjective. Everything is not a matter of opinion. You can't create your own truths. There are things that are true and things that are not true, and ways that we could figure these things out. And the thing that always bothers me most is if you speak to anybody who completely rejects a truth, and you probably know there's an entire organization out there called the Flat Earth Society that completely just reject the whole idea of the flat Earth, of the spherical Earth. And if you talk to any one of them or listen to them, if you don't bring up the earth, you will listen to them, and they reason just like we do.
They do. You're right.
They'll, look both ways before crossing the road.
Yeah.
They understand how gravity works. I mean, they don't understand how gravity works, but in a sense, they know if they step off a building, they're going to fall down. So they understand like the basic rules, and they have this blind spot, this compartmentalization, we call it in psychology, where you're completely functioning at one level for everything else except for this one topic.
Interesting.
This one idea that you have this strong ideological hold that you just can't let go. And nothing can penetrate that. It's like impenetrable in this little compartment in your mind. Nothing gets in, the facts and everything bounces off, but everything else in your life is just fine. And it's like if we understood this too, and we understood this about ourselves, and this is human, this is normal, this is how we work, because of the kind of discomfort that could come from these things, we would be on that better track that would put us all in a better position when we all agree what is actually true is true. We're going to be much better off as a society.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah. So some of these things, some of the things that have been subject to paradigmatic shifts over time, where the 3% or even the 0.5% or even the 0.001% is actually accurate, and the others, don't yet see the light on what's so, things that have happened over time, some of the more famous ones that we've already referred to,
right.
and others, those become more remarkable, even so, when you start looking at evidence-based ways of thinking versus rogue thinking or thinking outside of the box or thinking that doesn't take into consideration that which everybody else so-called knows. How do these things take place, these paradigmatic shifts?
Well, this is interesting because there's a logical fallacy called the Galileo fallacy. And this is the idea that you'll have, let's say, a flat earther approach you and say, well, yeah, I know you're making fun of me because 99.99% of all the people believe in this. And yes, I'm part of the minority, but look at Galileo. He was the minority and he was right. So therefore, every batshit crazy idea is right. It's this whole idea, and that's called the Galileo fallacy. It's just associating yourself with like the 1 in a million chance that someone was right one time when it was absolute minority, versus the almost statistical certainty that you're going to be wrong if you have this like one crazy idea. But there's also something to talk about, like the scientific paradigms. There is that one crazy idea that is the idea that completely shifts things, our way of thinking, our way of understanding human behavior, our way of understanding the world. There are those people out there, and there are those ideas out there that really do make the shift. And one thing about the scientific paradigms is that a lot of people that aren't really familiar with the scientific process kind of misunderstand from this is they will use that as well, that this whole idea of the paradigm shifts and incorporating the Galileo fallacy to say, well, just look at science and how many times it changed its mind before, like science has a mind. But they'll point to that and say, therefore I'm right, or therefore I'm probably right. Again, which we know is fallacious. Scientific paradigms are usually that way. And when we find out something new and different, it's usually building upon something that we already know and something that we've already discovered. And it's like very rarely does something like, at least in the last 400 years, when we really started implementing the scientific methodology to understand the world in the way we know it. Like, for example, when we knew that the earth wasn't flat, we're like, okay, hey, now it's round, or now it's a sphere. And then that didn't change, but it became a spherical obloid, meaning that when you look at the poles, it's pulled a little bit on the poles. So it's not a perfect sphere, but it's a little bit kind of like oblong. So that changed our idea. It wasn't a sphere anymore, but it updated it. It became a little bit more accurate. We could look at our understanding of evolution as well. And that's the same thing. Like when we first understand how life began to evolve, we had kind of like a basic understanding. Everything we learned on top of that, it just kind of focused it a little bit more, filled in some of the gaps that we didn't know. So like a true scientific paradigm, like if it's almost a certainty. Again, I'm not going to say it's certain. I won't say anything certain, but it's almost a certainty. So that's never going to get wiped out and say, okay, something completely different. It's never going to get wiped out that the Earth is a spherical obloid or something like that. Like, it's not going to be something completely crazy different. The scientific paradigms that we see today and the paradigm shifts, a lot of it is in the area like your field, or the area of psychology, the area of understanding, the understanding of human behavior, because a lot of what was established is kind of like a model for the way we understand things, as opposed to something that's physical, something that we could use, that we can measure. So like in the social sciences, we have a little bit more flexibility there, and we see different ways of looking at things. Like, people will say that Freud was a paradigm shift with the way that he understood things. And then you have like the behavioralist, and that was kind of a paradigm shift in a way. So there are new ways of looking at things. And yes, we could look back at Freud today, and as you know, like a lot of he was like a crazy cocaine guy, and a lot of things that he said really don't apply today. But a lot of the things that he did say, they still hold a lot of water and weight today as well.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting when we talk about paradigm shifts, because in a sense, some things are unlikely to change from what we know. But in another sense, some things, especially more in the social sciences, we can see some major changes or different ways of looking at things.
Exactly. Super cool. All right. Well, it seems like, again, pointing to one more piece, there's like depending on how far upstream you go to challenge a particular foundational idea that many things have grown from, that increases the likelihood of a possible paradigmatic shift. If you go backwards, and then you find a particular fact that everything has been built from because it has been thought to be so, and it turns out to be challengeable or in fact false, then everything that flowed downstream from that becomes, of course, altered as a result, at least in my linear way, my binary way of thinking inside of space and time continuum. So before we go too far along that line and create our next podcast, because we really could speak to this towards infinity. And I'm on with Bo Bennett. Bo is a good friend of mine and a colleague who has really been committing himself, really declaring himself and dedicating himself to making a difference in the world of social psychology, and doing so using virtual technology as well as human behavior research and education in ways that we can all help each other live on this planet a little more peaceful, a little bit more truthfully, a little bit more socially acceptably, a little bit more really. And that's who I'm on with today is Bo Bennett. We've had an extraordinary conversation this morning, now turned to afternoon here in Los Angeles, California, where I am. So, Bo, let's speak again, and let's speak again soon, and we can do another podcast. And I'm guessing our listeners will ask us for another one anyway. So let's make that happen. Is there anything you want to say in closing with this particular conversation? Anything you said that you either want to change now that there's new information, or anything you want to back off of, or anything you want to declare as being actually truthful, or anything you want to say about how the conversation went for you?
Give me that option a year from now. I'll listen to this again. We'll do some editing. We might have to do some editing, but no. Overall, pretty happy with the way things went. I think it was a good conversation. That's about it.
Okay. All right. Well, great. Why don't you tell my listeners or our listeners about how they can reach you, and if there's anything they can do, if they want to follow you, or if they want to just maybe touch base with you, ask you a question, join up with you, at least have an idea of maybe they could learn from you, and maybe who knows what kind of content they might want. How, if someone was interested in legitimately learning more about what Bo Bennett is up to, or joining forces from you, how might they do that, Bo?
Just go to bobennett.com. It's that simple. Yep. That's my author website, where you'll find all of my books. You'll be able to order any of the books. You'll be able to see my courses. You'll be able to jump around, ask me questions. You'll be able to see the websites from there. Yeah, that's a good way to get into my life in a non-creepy way.
That's fabulous. So Bo is actually my entryway into anything like what we're doing here today. I think I said earlier that my first podcast many years ago was in Bo's, I think it was in your basement or some studio near your home 14 years ago. And your capacity to build extraordinary websites, we somehow got through this conversation without mentioning that. And, what you did for me back in 2006, I'm just continually and always grateful for who you've been in my life. So
thank you. I appreciate that.
Man. And yeah, so with that, it's just been a pleasure. It really has. It's been a fabulous conversation. I hope to continue it soon. It's really fun to catch up with you and to hear where you're at on any given day, knowing that tomorrow could change with respect to new information flooding in
Very good.
now and then. So thank you for being on the podcast. Dr. Fred Moss. I'm the founder and creator of Welcome to Humanity, among other things. And we're out to really take a look at the way mental health and mental illness is dealt with and cared for around the world, and different alterations of that might be useful, as well as what might be so or not so, as Dr. Bennett mentioned during this conversation. Bo, thanks for being with us. Thanks for everyone else who helped with produce. Ryan Levesque, our mutual friend, has been in the background this entire call. Isn't that beautiful that he's been with us? Thanks for doing that, Ryan. Thanks for being on the call, Bo Bennett.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. You know, something I really, really loved about the interview with Bo Bennett is his just utter brilliance. This is a man who's academic in nature and just so human at the core. I really, really appreciate that about him. I appreciated what he said about intellect and what he said about people in general and how we think and how we act, and what we can know and what we don't know about how people are and what they do. An insight that really struck me from today's show was that when talking to someone about these topics, we can always get to a space where neither of us know and then move on from there. Perhaps as you were listening, you thought of a person, or maybe even 2 or 3 people, who need to hear this episode. So why not reach out to them right now and invite them to subscribe to the Welcome to Humanity podcast. And speaking of subscribing, I'd like to ask a favor of you that is small in effort, though really, really big, as far as impact for me and the show, and for the people around you. First, could you please take a moment to hit the subscribe button on your podcast player? And then that way, you'll get the latest episodes as they become available. Secondly, if you actually appreciate what we're doing here, could you just take 5 minutes to leave a review on the Apple Podcast? I surely would appreciate it. Subscribes and reviews are 2 major ways we can reach more listeners with the Welcome to Humanity podcast. If the conversations we're having here contribute to your life, please play it forward by subscribing and leaving a review. I and my team, as well as the people in your life, would truly be grateful for your support. And to catch up on past episodes, head on over to welcometohumanity.net/podcast. Until next time, this is Dr. Fred, and it's been the Welcome Humanity podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Have a beautiful, beautiful day.